So let's talk about the suicidal urge as one of the 17 emotions that I identify in my work, in my book, The Language of Emotions, and also in my book, The Art of Empathy. The suicidal urge is a tremendously dangerous emotion to feel. Any of you who have been suicidal know that it is intense and powerful and overwhelming and very dangerous if you don't know how to work with it. If you do know how to work with it, it can bring you liberty, certainty, transformation, and rebirth. But it's hard to know that because of the way that we approach the suicidal urge as a sign of supreme mental illness, incredible mental illness, or why would anybody want to kill themselves? That, we can't understand it. In the language of emotions, I call the suicidal urge the darkness before dawn. And it's certainly, we understand the darkness, right? It has a purpose. It has a place. Some people don't ever feel suicidal. The closest they get to it is sort of a deep situational depression, which I talked about in a previous video. But for some people, suicide is a semi-regular occurrence. I know it was for me. I survived molestation as a child, a very young child. And for people who had early trauma, depression and suicidal urges tend to be something that they are prone to because the early trauma does not set you up for an awesome life, right? And my first really strong suicidal urge was when I was 10. So I got through it, and I ended up growing up with the suicidal urge through my teens and 20s and 30s. It coming around sort of at semi-regular intervals and bringing me just into the depths of despair. And not self-hatred for me, but there's no reason to live. There's no reason for any of this. It's too painful. What I began to understand as I was working with all the rest of the emotions one by one, as I developed my sort of overall theory of emotion, I sort of put it's like suicide urge, no. Yeah, I'll work with sadness and anger and shame, and those are great. Happiness, joy, jealousy, envy, it's all cool. But suicide urge, no, there's a special badness of that. But I remember being in a really intense suicidal urge, and I had learned by that time to speak to the emotions. Anger, what do you want me to do? Sadness, what do I need to do? Fear, what do you have to tell me? So I had learned how to sort of empathically engage with each of the emotions in its own time and its own space and its own language. And I was in a pretty severe suicidal urge period, and I just turned to the suicide and I said, what do you want from me? And I thought what it would say is, you're worthless, you deserve to die, just, horrible, horrible language and intent. And everything got quiet. And all of a sudden I saw a vision of London in World War II when the bombings were happening. And the Germans were bombing London. And I saw parents putting their children in trains to go to the country. And what I came to understand was that my energy, my life force was being put into a train and sent to the country. While there's this grim scene in London and these parents making these grim decisions in the face of war. And that vision helped me begin to understand what the purpose of the suicidal urge was, which was, with depression, it is to take your energy away so you can't keep traipsing forward doing something that you really shouldn't do, right? Your depression is like, stop it, now let it go, because that's not going to work. With the suicidal urge, it is when things are so bad, they are so bleak, they are so grim, that they're going to kill you if you're not careful, right? And so the psyche takes the hope and the dreams and the capacity to move forward and everything and moves it out into the country. And here you are in war-torn London with bombs falling all around you. And that was the picture that I got. And I began to understand and work with the suicide urge in that way. And what I understood with the suicide urge, you know, with the suicide urge, right? It brings the energy of not death, but murder, like murder of yourself. And what I learned to do was look and see what needed to die in my life. This was off the table, right? We don't kill me. That's not going to be useful. I won't be able to study suicide if I'm dead, right? So what I learned to do was turn toward and ask the question, what needs to die? What can no longer be tolerated in my life? What needs to go? And in asking that question, my suicide urge was able to go and pick out the pieces. This poverty, this despair, this depression, this loss, this sense of not belonging in the world, this. And it was overwhelming, but all of it was true. It was absolutely true. And because I had already learned to work with the other emotions, I was able to bring some of them forward and help myself work. If it was a sadness situation, you know, sadness allows you to let go of things that aren't working anymore. I would just be like, sadness, come and help me. Let's let go of this. Let's let go of that. Let's let go of this. Just let it go. And I was able to, over a period of maybe a year, go through each of the areas in my life that were heading me in a very, very bad direction and were going to end up killing me anyway. My decisions about going into relationships with extremely dangerous people. My lack of grounding in the world, my lack of social support. All of it was extremely dangerous. And my suicide urge was sort of grimly putting my children on the train to go. Go. And I may never have seen those children again, but that was what needed to happen, right? So the suicide urge is a very, very powerful emotion. It can be very dangerous. And what I did was take the danger of it and focused it on the things in my life that needed not just to go away, but to be killed, right? And so a process, one of the 5 empathic mindfulness skills that I developed, one is called burning contracts. And in this skill, you actually take an imaginary contract and you unroll it in front of yourself and you pour out what needs to go. And for me, I'm a very, very imaginal person. I have a very vivid imagination. I'm a writer. You know, I sort of live in this world of imagination. So I could imagine all these things coming out. Some people would need to physically write it down. They're more physical people on an actual piece of paper. But I would pour it out. And all the emotions would come up and I would see what it was that I was living under. And then I would roll up this contract, tie it up, and I would throw it away from myself to show my whole psyche and all of my emotions and every part of my intelligence. I'm done with this. I don't want to do this anymore. I know this doesn't work and I have a space for something that will work. It was the suicidal urge that helped me move from all of the behaviors and all of the expectations that I learned as a child being molested repeatedly. At a very tender point in my life, at the age of 3, 4, 5, when I was learning what it was to be a female, what it was to be a person, what it was to be a member of a community, and what it was to be in the presence of a very sick person. I learned devastating things, and I was still living it because how could I get out of it? I learned it too young. I didn't know what I learned, right? But my suicide urge knew the whole time, right? It came up when I was 10, and I didn't know anything about how to work with it, but it was like, I'm going to be here for you when you're ready to get rid of this devastating information that you have picked up, this devastating training that is going to end you up on the streets or in a battered women's shelter, where I did end up, right? But this suicide urge gave me the power and the intensity and honestly the violence I needed to destroy those things that I had learned and make room for healthier learning. And it took a while, yeah, right? But it was that, people say, Carla, how did you go from this, homeless, really troubled young person into, a famous author, right? And I have to say, the suicide urge. My friend, the suicide urge. That is what got me here. Because there were so many things, so much training, really sick early training, that was frankly dangerous and endangering and fatal to me, that needed to get killed. So now if I have any sort of sense of a suicidal urge coming up, and for me, because I understand emotions coming up at different levels of intensity, when there's just like a little bit of a suicidal urge, like not like I want to kill myself, but it's like I would like not to be alive right now. This world is pretty awful. I'll immediately drop everything and go around and look what needs to be killed. And I can move through a suicidal episode in about 15 minutes now, right? Because I know what the emotion is doing, how to work with it, what its purpose is, and what its skills are, which is, for suicidal urge, is like, boom, that ends right now. That's it. This isn't funny anymore. That's done. And having that, that intelligence in me is wonderful in business. It's like I don't tell anybody I'm working with suicide urge right now, but if people say, we want you to do this and this and this ridiculous thing, and I just kind of go, no. And there's not even a question. Do we keep going with Carla at this point? It's like, no. I'm no. So why am I laughing about the suicidal urge? Because it's my friend. Because it's my protector. Because it is the thing that got me out of hell and helped me find my way back into the world. You would think the opposite, right? That it brings you to hell. And what the suicidal urge told me with that vision of London in the middle of the war, with the bombs coming down and the children totally unsafe, is you were in hell. And the suicidal urge helped me get out of it. It gave me the skills and the intensity and the power to get out of hell. In suicide hotlines, they have learned now to simply let the person talk. What is it that got you to this place? Not, oh, they're there now, it'll all be wonderful. Don't tell a suicidal person that it will all be wonderful. No, you're in the wrong emotion. If they're in happiness, you can tell them it'll all be wonderful. But when they're in suicide, it's important to listen. What got them there? And as they begin to speak, you will begin to hear the 5, 10, 15 unlivable situations in their lives and the reasons that it actually makes sense for them to want to end their lives. And the work in this empathic approach to emotions is to listen to the suicidal urge and treat it as a form of intelligence. What needs to die? This, me, my life, that is off the table. What needs to die? And your suicide urge will immediately turn its laser focus and go, right here, right there. And you can use the process of burning contracts or work with a therapist to really zero in on what needs to die, what needs to change, and what needs to be reborn in you. For many people, it's that person they were before the trauma occurred, right? That person's still there. With the help of the suicidal urge and shame and guilt and anger and sadness and fear and panic, you can bring that person back. But it is an emotive process that does that, right? It's not a cognitive process. It's not about thinking and talking. Because for those of us who are traumatized, we weren't traumatized by thoughts and words. We were traumatized by actions, by situations, by having our emotions turned against us. And there's a lot that needs to be done to help someone come away, out of that. And the suicidal urge, darkness before dawn. There will be a dawn. There will be a dawn. Listen to your emotions. Work with them as themselves. And know that each one is a gift from beyond. Take care.